Thank you for being here. I guess we'll start by maybe just introducing ourselves a little bit and what we do usually. So yes, I'm a dancer and choreographer, based in Bristol, and I guess I came to dance through performing, and I was working for a company in London with Farnham dance for about 8 years. After which time I was sort of ready to venture into making my own work. Yeah, so I've been doing that since 2006 or thereabout, and I've been mainly, interested lots of the time to develop work that involved me as a performer, and felt like a natural way for me to start going from myself and out. So yeah, solo forms, a lot of duets, but more recently I made a group piece, which was much bigger in scale in terms that in the sense that it involved 5 dancers and 4 musicians. So we shared, 9 of us were sharing the stage. Choreography for me is it's a way of making sense of the world, of sort of discussing my relationship to the environment I'm in, and trying to communicate something about that.
And I'm Helen Carmack, and I trained at college in making, in metal specifically, and really though started from quite a sort of workshop-based training through to a much more broad creative training, which included a lot of thinking about drawing as a making process, and material in its broadest form, so thinking about how you could use materials, not just metal, in different ways, but I suppose the key thing about the metal is that that's where my understanding of material in terms of density, feel, tensile strength, different things, that's where that understanding comes from. So I think that when I'm working with other things, even drawing and so on, I sort of am working from that. I also sort of look out into the world through sort of metal spectacles, maybe. And so I pick out a lot of metal things when I'm travelling around, but I also think about the economy in those terms and historical things, and I'm interested in making from a broad sweep. So not just in what we might understand craft making to be, but making as a thinking process. I've also done curation. I curated an exhibition called Taking Time, Craft and the Slow Revolution, which looked at the similarities between the slow movement and making, and about place, provenance, time, and I think that's all of that comes into this. We were just looking, actually, we have Annie Catterall's here today, and she came to meet with us today, and we were talking about some of what we've been doing, and I was remembering again that I've recently been feeling like I could have been a detective, or maybe I'm a detective in some ways, and we just found some notes that we said to each other at the beginning of the process, and I said to her, I feel like a bit of a detective. And so I had been to see, Leila and I met 5 times before we started the residency. We didn't know each other before that. And in those 5 times we met for about an hour, sometimes with Sue Davis and Alison, sometimes alone. And I went and saw Leila perform at the Royal Opera House, and Leila came to my studio and spent time with me there one day. So we got to know each other in that sense. So when we began here 2 weeks ago, we weren't starting from a standing start. I think we felt comfortable with each other. We had a conversation that had begun,
so we came with lots of questions, big long list of questions, some suggested by Sue, and some I guess that we'd developed for each other, curiosity about each other's practice. And so we knew we wanted to delve into that and to try and find some beginnings of answers as we were working. ourselves a few starting points, making sure that we would store before we started. And so we each came with a suitcase. We filled a suitcase with things that mattered to us or things that we wanted to share.
We haven't got a projector here, but we were trying to print off some images to share and pieces and pieces for us with our suitcases. The printer broke halfway through this process, so we'll stop abruptly. But yes.
So yeah, things that thoughts, words that are meaningful or that we were curious about, material. So just to send us off on the conversation. So that was part of day one, was unpacking the suitcases and finding some sort of order for them. So we laid out a big sheet of white paper, and I think it was by colour. That was the first thing we did together. We just laid out our objects.
Yeah. And then this was quite a key part of day one.
Yeah.
We can just continue because this is an important. This is Gorm, our website designer, who's also a magnificent photographer. And every time Gorm comes to visit, it's brilliant because he has a lovely way of documenting things, and it's been quite a joy to have him with us because actually in that moment that he's doing things, he shows us things as well. So that's been a really nice sharing thing. But we are through this process being watched, as it were, and that's quite strange in places, but interesting in others, and it's created this almost layered process of something, which I think is becoming something of what we're doing. So at points we have had we've had a camera that was filming us, and the images were being sent back to Gorm. And we were playing around because we could also see them coming up online. So we were playing around with projecting that and changing it as it went on. So watching the layers
and working in front of some layering already.
And this somewhat seems to reflect something of our environment. So being in a space, we began our time here in a room you can see there, that's the room that we're in. It's rather like an office space. It's various shades of green.
The green became a theme.
The green became a theme, so we started adding green things to the room, spotting all things green. And so we have made that our sort of base home environment. We go out from there. And so the layering process is also somewhere there because we're watching out and going out into the university and Farnham environment, looking into things. We've had a close look at some of the things that are more distant things, and so that's gathered some information. I think that's quite important.
Yeah, I think one of the things we did also early on, probably day two, was to put some paper on the wall and share some words, some of the language that we use in our practice. And I guess in an attempt to not take for granted, can you see? Well, that's empty. That's
I was saying, I don't think there's anything happening. So this is before the words appeared.
I guess in an attempt not to take for granted that because we shared certain words, they had the same meaning necessarily, just to make sure we sort of, invested a bit of time in understanding each other and what we meant by using a word like making or maker, sketching, what that might be for Helen, how do I sketch? And the wall is full of words, and again, it's sort of an ongoing process for us to try and unpeel a little bit of those meanings.
Yeah, and these sorts of ideas, this is us discussing sketching, and in some ways, I suppose, from a visual art point of view, I assume sketching means drawing, making notes, making sketches, gathering things, but it's actually, I know it's a very personal activity and everybody does that differently. And so it was very good to hear your sketching idea, which is more...
I think of it physically, or I use the word in a physical sense of, I guess a sketch is maybe just a partly formed idea that I try to translate into movement. And so I might use sketches in, okay, that's not a fully formed idea, but let's take it into this space and play with it. And yeah, that's sketching is for me.
And then at that point of gathering words, we also started to gather words. Well, at one point we were adding a word, stepping forward, adding a word, and then letting the other step forward and reply or respond with another word. So we were playing a little bit with a sort of ping pong back and forward of ideas about that, but then spending more time sitting back and discussing what those words meant. And I think we've got a long way to go with that. It's a real unpicking thing, and yeah.
And environment is one that is really top one of those ways of how environment impacts on what you're doing and what you decide to do. I think we agree on the importance of that. And it was coming back to our room, one of the first things we said is okay, how do we make in here, or what does this make us do, what do we feel like doing there? And there was this green theme, and already it's interesting, but we went shopping for material, and then we found this rotary area, and that was reminiscent of this space. And already at the beginning of this, half of the residency, we went, let's buy this for when we're in London. So in a sense, wanting to carry with us a little piece of what we found here for the next stage. But just the imprint that, or the importance of where you're making and what you make. That's the key. And just also realizing as we go that this environment we're in currently is alien to both of us. Although Helen is a craft artist working across different mediums, the university setting isn't close necessarily to the studio she works in, and it's not my environment either. So that's quite interesting to find ourselves there. And then for me to see, so it's full of new stuff for me there. So it's been great to venture out into the workshops and to actually touch the clay and feel the weight of the iron in the glass blowing workshops, and all those things were really key, and it's given us more words to discuss. And I guess there's now a curiosity to see how it relates to what we're doing now.
Yeah.
Just recently I was thinking it's a little bit as if, I guess there's a distance between the setting here and Helen's practice, a little bit as if we were in a dance environment that was a school environment, say, like a professional dance school course, say, where we go and get lots of tasters of dance, and would probably give you a really broad sense of possibilities, and then seeing how that would relate to what I do now.
So I suppose in that sense, over the past 2 weeks, we've been sort of both out of our comfort zone somewhat, although for me, I recognise the environment. I've taught a lot in universities too, so I recognise the teaching environment. I recognise the materials, and have enjoyed sort of poking around, being very nosy, because all the undergraduate students have finished. There aren't that many students around. There are MA, PhD students, and so there's a lot of space around, so we've been able to potter around a bit. And we have had all these inductions, but Layla and I gravitated towards the textile area. And this was probably because of the space. So the immediate thing, we went into the space, there were big tables, they're printing tables, and they're waist height. And actually in my studio I have a very large waist height table. I work standing most of the time. I don't sit very often, so I move around a table. So we spent some time this week in this studio in different ways, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but that's been really interesting to to gravitate towards something. But it's not necessarily a sort of discipline. It's not because it's textiles, it's more to do with environment and the quality of environment, so the space, the light, the calm, the people in there, the fact that we actually were describing yesterday that because there are lots of looms and they've been pushed back for their summer show, but there are still people working. It's almost like a forest, and you find these little clearings where somebody's got their loom set up and you can see working activity. So it's quite nice, this sort of these little populated places, but it's been very easy for us to go in there. Maybe in a situation where we do feel slightly out of zone.
Yeah. So we've been exploring those territories, and in our suitcases there are lots of films and books, and so we've been using that material as well and sharing that, and often having a film in the background as we were working on something else, talking about something else, or there is more in the suitcases that we can get through.
There's quite a lot to unpack.
There is, yeah. So we'll slowly we're making choices about what it is that we're doing. And we ended week one feeling, whoa, that was full. And I guess it informed what we felt we wanted for the next week. And there's a sense in which, there was a sense that I felt like I wanted to make sure I could experience making alongside and with them, and make sure that we allowed enough time for that experience.
We did one of these feedback sessions last Friday, and then after that we did some very, very short films, each alone saying what our first week working side by side, what that experience was, what had we expected that to be, and what was it then. And I suppose that guided us into the following week. And actually, my experience now of that has changed. I feel different at the end of this week.
As it did at the end.
Yeah. So I felt like after the first week, what had happened was that we'd been able to set up the right conditions, the right environment, the right
make the nest,
make things workable. So have a way in which we could then begin to comfortably work together. Because in some way, and maybe this is something that we are discussing, but in some way, apart from my teaching experience, it's not an everyday occurrence for me to be watched or to be in public. It's quite private. Although I should say I do work with other people a fair amount, so I do expose myself in that sense quite openly to that. And I have also worked a lot sort of in process, showing process of my work, and I do document what I do through my work as well, so I do expose that, but it's quite controlled, and we have spoken about this, about what we will and won't show. So one of the mechanisms that I use is to show sort of day-to-day.
It's just fascinating, I guess, yeah. It's fascinating, this intending and documenting process, but the number of people in the room, say, influences what will happen. So being two is not the same as being three in the room. So there's, in a sense, in my mind, like the process we're documenting is not the process that it would have been had only been the two of us, because it does change. It's a and so it's not a comment or a judgment on value on one or the other. It's just fascinating. Yeah, it's part of the environment, and it's fascinating.
Yeah,
what that does.
Yeah, and I think that's something that I've kind of been thinking about a lot this week. You know, even the thing of remembering to switch the. You saw me, didn't you? Remembering to switch the sound recorder on.
The pace of things.
Yeah.
And other things.
Or hearing something click, or somebody walking around. That's
all
part of the process. And I think that we've both been documenting that for ourselves as well. So we've been watching what's happening for us as well as being watched and documented. So
watched towards the end, mainly of the process. There's a point at which you say, okay, it's like, you know, but for me, yeah, yesterday we had a moment when there was 5 of us in the room, and it was just interesting to, as I was doing, to think about that, like to go through the process. So I feel really watched, and what does that do? Does that change how I do things, or can I, you know, and let those thoughts pass as clouds, and yeah, just deal with those and bring them on. Interesting.
So this week again, we've spent some time in looking at some processes, kind of from an outside in looking in thing, not in it. So we've been watching in a sense and trying out a bit, but still sort of feeling of looking in. But then we spent some time together doing stuff, and we went into the textile studio and we worked at these print tables, and we actually have both been using some of the ideas and words that we came up with and things that we've been discussing, and took those in as subject matter to work within the space.
What does it mean to work side by side? I mean, it feels like there's many ways in which we could do that. So it's interesting. We're quite curious about one another and what we do. So there's a lot of talking happening, but particularly dear to me are those moments where we did a period of work in silence and sort of through other ways learnt about one another's ways. Yeah, those have been particularly interesting times for me.
And we've been, because Lola, as she described, her sketches will be trying things out and filming them. We've been using that.
Yeah.
So Lola's been filming us as we've been working, and this has been the endlessly fascinating thing, I think, for me this week, and something that I think if you follow the process you'll see more of. I'm not usually filmed. I've kind of got a bit more involved in film over the past year. Again, we were talking with Annie this morning about, you know, how we did the facility to document, and I've had a digital camera for a long time, and it became a very important part of my work, and in fact things changed at that point. I use it to look back at stuff all the time. I see it as another way of seeing something, so I might make something, then look at something, and then I'll put it on the internet and look at it in a different way. And then last year I started using film a bit, but never to the extent that you would have to use it, never. And so while we were in the textile studio this week, I wasn't aware that there was a camera on me. And one thing that we'd spoken about before this whole process was, well, Sue and Ali came to visit me in my studio quite a long time ago. It was at least a year, probably longer than that. And when you left, I was left thinking about what's behind me, because I ostensibly work in this space and forward. I wasn't really thinking about what was behind, but then started thinking more about this, and we've talked a lot, and started to think how important sound is. So from my own environment to also doing things like teaching, it's how you hear stuff, and you become very aware of everything around you in that way, and you can tell whether something's working or not, you know, by how it sounds. And so this week I was filmed from behind and actually playing back. We were filmed. And playing that back, seeing our hands working together was quite an incredible moment, because we're not working together, we're working side by side, and yet our hands somehow
Conversation.
at points they're completely in time, and there are some little clips that have gone up on the blog where you can see it, and it was amazing to see this thing. It's, my God, I found it really striking.
Yes, so did I. Was happy sort of accidents, I guess, that we came to do some more work in the same sort of way, in similar ways, and playing with bringing in different elements or taking out some elements and seeing what that does.
And actually now, you really helped me think about this morning, the fact that actually that will never happen to me again. You know, that understanding something for the first time, because I was unaware of it, I will never have that experience again. So it feels like quite a
we have that one when we're working, when we're revising and finding something for improvisation and knowing that whatever you capture from that is not going to be that first time.
But then there are these lovely moments as well where I would do something, because actually I was gathering things from around the room and making marks. I'm really interested how materials and tools the marks that you can make from them say something about them, so their physicality or what they do. So it's finding things and making marks with them, so making noises, and again, that was really nice. You started.
Yeah, I'm interested in performance, and so being, I say often, can you be in two places at once? Can I really be really centered and really in tune with what's going on for me? Not being pulled out of myself, but really super hyper aware, and using what's around me in what I'm doing. And so those were questions that were really present in the last few days. And so sound came into it, and I guess that brought some interesting moments. Yeah, just using some of the things I heard, feeding that through what I was doing.
And then what we also both really liked was what was going on around us, and some great moments where people are moving through the space doing things, but because they were taking down the summer show, there were these whiteboards going on.
Editing what we were doing.
And then something go across the image. So that was a really strong part of the week, and we moved that on again. We did more work yesterday, but we've also sort of before this and around it as well, we've been exploring some of our own territory. So we've been doing some sort of short exercises. So we did a making one where we just made we were making things.
I think that just refers to spontaneously making, which is I think something that we both like doing in a way of understanding something, just going into the making of the doing.
Yeah, just getting into the doing rather than the talking, because we've done a lot of talking, so it's like, right, stop, now we're going to do something else. But also we've done some movement stuff, which I found very powerful. And already I feel like I'm thinking in a different way. It's quite incredible.
That is fascinating to see. You already kind of feel the potential for what we're doing, sort of having an influence on our practices. I feel the same. In a way. So yes, short exercises about being in the space and relationships to that space. Senses, I guess, awakening awareness and senses. And we did a little exercise this morning, and I was really struck by the quality of listening. It feels like there's a sense of there's certainly something shared or something you must be working on in your practice, because we did a little improvisation, and it was really, oh my god, the quality of listening was wonderful, I thought. So yeah, excited to work out on that more, to keep exploring that.
Yeah, and that's really exciting to hear. We were basically doing talk to say what.
Oh, we simply I decided to concentrate on the hands, because we seem key in this, in what you do, and in my work too. And we just chose 5 movements that we could repeat, and we did them side by side, kneeling, and yeah, it was just conversing using those 5 movements and listening to one another to decide to go against or to decide to go with. So very simple, but incredibly telling in terms of sort of improvising. Improvising. And you felt like you were at home in that.
And it was interesting because the sound of the paper, we were working on paper when we were doing this. And I think that's really quite key, because I work on paper a lot. So yeah, very sensitive to the sound of the paper and what you're doing, moving around something on paper. So now we've got to a sort of point where we are, last night I did feel like I was going to explode. I just felt so full to the brim of stuff and like, so,
time for sifting.
yeah, sifting. We've talked about sifting. And sifting, I suppose all these words are funny because sifting again, I work a lot with industrial enamel, and to use that, it's liquid, but you have to sift it. You have to put it through a sieve. So we've been looking at words that we use a lot because we use them in our day-to-day practice. So yeah, sifting some distilling, yeah, will be good. But I feel very excited about next week because next week we've got a few visitors, we've got a few talks, but we're going to be together.
Yeah.
And I think we've got a lot to explore right now.
Yeah, big list. Yeah. And as you said, it's exciting to know that there's that week that we'll be able to focus on and make some choices. So we're never going to get through that list.
But I suppose to remember that there's another part to this as well. So this is just the first part. It'd be interesting to see, because actually, we've probably got enough material to work for a few years, probably individually and together. I don't know, but there's an enormous amount. I mean, this week we also one bit that I really enjoyed. We did some throwing.
It was another success. It was an amazing experience to try and work with the clay. And yeah, that could have lasted a day.
Well, I think that was it. We could have,
But it was longer.
And then we had a glass blowing demonstration yesterday, which was great. And we went and saw the archivist working, which was sort of, well, I found it immensely intriguing, although they were describing it as being, this will look really boring to you.
It was
fascinated by it. So this sort of unpeeling of surfaces. I think we were very lucky when we were there because is it Becky?
Yeah,
Rebecca was taking glass slides out of pockets, and she found one that said kiln accident and opened it, and then every slide had a perfect pot on it until she got to the last one, which was a major accident in the kiln. So it was rather lovely to see.
Felt like we were part of some discovery, didn't it? It was lovely.
And yeah, so it's been really interesting watching other people and watching their hands, and we've kind of really focused in on watching parts of what other people are doing.
I think it's great, yeah, there's a sense of learning through hearing the language that's used, and I found it really extremely helpful and inspiring to watch and to learn something about the pace and the care with which and the energy with which things are done. From the archivists to the glass blowing, and the experience of the weight of those saying, feeling the clays. Yeah. This is kind of it, isn't it?
Maybe. I don't know.
I think it's fine actually. If it's 3:10, so it's probably a good point to see if anyone's
open it up.
To start things off, maybe this will help. I forgot that we were supposed to ask some questions from what people have been putting into the blog. So I collected one this morning to start things off. What I didn't do was get the name of the person that's written it, but This is her question. It's how is the nature of the collaboration, interaction changing as you continue to work together? And are there more similarities in your approach than differences?
I find it a little bit hard to reflect on how it's changing as I'm in it so fully at the moment. It's quite hard.
Yeah.
But there are lots of similarities. I think, although some of the materials we use are different. There's lots of differences, but I think we are struck by how many similarities there are in our practices. I think I mentioned one in the sort of the learning through doing or making or understanding something through that, and the liking to work, a sense of immediacy. But in some of the things that interest us, like the traces left behind, and some thematic things
that we're interested in, which might be why we were also put together. I don't know. I think we're going to have to ask Sue that next week. But we actually, I think I'm really struck by the similarities. I mean, I thought there would be, but even more so than I thought. It was interesting actually when Roanne Dodds was here on Wednesday, and she came and watched us in working around the print table, and she noted a confidence in the way that we were both moving around. And I didn't really think about that, but I've spent hundreds and hundreds of hours on my feet around the table exploring the nature of that, and you've spent hundreds of hours. And I think maybe seeing those two things together, she could see that, and that's really interesting. No, just that you can see it in our hands. You can see they kind of know what they're doing, but we didn't know what we were doing because we were completely improvising. We had some ideas and we were exploring some stuff, and there were some really nice moments where you see a hand stop, and you can see thinking going on before it moves somewhere else. But then how they kind of, you know more about this than me, but how they seem to sync. So how we end up, we talked a lot about unison. We were thinking about what that means for both of us in different ways. And we talked about this at the sharing thing last week. And there was a really, I've been reading this, which is something that Layla brought with her, Jonathan Burrows, the choreographer's handbook, which is really, I found it really incredible. Yeah. And at one point he talks about the sound of unison, but hearing different voices there, and that really rang a bell. But I've been really struck by how in some of the little films that I didn't know were being made, our hands are almost in unison.
Yeah.
So it's almost like they've gone into
something.
and I had no idea that was going on. So that's really
and I think there's part of that is unconscious or subconscious, thinking in one another, and at times probably more direct catching of something that I
you just say something.
The trigger,
And then the nice sort of nuances of people around you and how they're. And it's quite amusing because Layla's sped up the film, so it is quite fun to watch.
I was thinking about how much we seem to be sharing, and I was thinking actually that maybe the conversation would be more difficult, or maybe there'd be more distance in a way, in terms of how we do things. I was paired up with someone who actually shares my name, who's also a dancer and choreographer, but working as a break dancer, maybe, or as a flamenco dancer. I think potentially, depending on, I don't know, but I can see the potential for there potentially being more distance between the practices, whereas we don't share the same name
all.
What were Sue Davis's questions for you guys?
We've got pages of them.
Maybe that was a bad question.
There's lots.
Tell you some.
Yeah. Something about making, but not just about making. What is the journey towards making? How does an artist arrive at their thinking? Why do we do what we do? Something about investigating the acting process of making differently. What is the feeling of what you do, and why does it matter? And what do you want to do more of?
That's quite nice. How do we support thoughts in flight?
In what?
Flight.
In transit.
In transit.
We know that there were 4 key ones or 4. Do artists have common questions that trigger work into being? Can the artist of one medium broaden the inquiry of the other? Is it possible to unpeel the early stages of collaboration? How does an artist, as I was saying, how does an artist arrive at their thinking, and how do they make adjustments as their lives and thinking evolve?
And this is maybe something that we will be looking at next week. Memories and patterns. How to stop repeated thought and movement structures, habitual actions after watching film in progress. And emptying yourself of these, mixing up the order of thoughts. So,
that's kind of, for me, that's kind of a little bit happening in a way. There's something about, not necessarily the order of thoughts, but the pace of things maybe, and how much time you spend, inside before looking out, looking in before looking out and back. I can't really articulate it very well yet, but there's something that's been sort of challenged or worked on here differently to how I work usually.
I think learning more about our different ways of working is something that there's still loads.
Yeah.
I feel like I don't know some of the most basic things. So there just never seems to be enough time in the day. We seem to run through the days and be at the end before it becomes. I think that's a good thing, good sign.
Yeah.
I'll make an observation too, if that's just to throw in. Fascinating hearing you both talk. There seems to be some really key themes running through it, and one is about physical notation, both of you. When you were talking about sketch, I can understand that for you as a process of physical notation, but equally it's a process of physical notation for Helen too. And so there's quite a sort of interesting interior and exterior experience of that. And somebody said, I don't know who it was, something about it takes 10,000 hours to be an expert in anything. And I suppose that's resonating with me when I listen to you talk about the process. There's something about the experience of performance, private, public. So we're starting to deal with binaries immediately. And in a sense, the questions that Sue's posed to you are very much about binaries. And I like this idea of stopping the thought in flight. Was it stopping the thought in flight? I might have got that wrong, but capturing the thought in flight. There's a point beyond all that which makes me want to be a bit naughty and say, so what? So what to be provocative, not to be dismissive at all, but I'm kind of curious about the points of difference and the tension that's required in collaboration, as well as the points of similarity. So I think for me, what would be interesting is what comes next in relation to that.
I don't think I keep thinking that too. I just don't think we've had enough time together to find out.
It sounds like the beginning of it sounds like early stage love affair. It's just also wonderful, we love each other, and I'm going, it's when they've got through that phase and she notices that she doesn't like her shoes. Yeah, I kind of think that's really interesting.
There was an interesting one yesterday when we were watching the glass blowing and something popped.
Oh yeah.
And you went,
I don't like.
yeah, and you said that I don't like fire. And I thought, I love fire.
Yeah.
So that was quite funny, that complete opposite I mean, in what I do, you have to love it to do it. You can't. Yeah, it was great. It's always good to see for the fire, but so yeah, no, I'm sure some of it will start to appear, and I think we're quite interested in it. Also, having those provocative questions. I mean, it's one of the things that hasn't come yet, but I think is to come.
Yeah.
We'll need them, those. But we've just been trying to understand
I think you're absolutely right. The
quite a big
difficulty.
environment. I mean, it's quite funny, you know, being called a craft artist and coming into a craft environment that isn't necessarily my version of it. So that's quite good. So you're navigating that as well. So it's some of the navigation that's.
But yes, looking forward to some collisions. If they will happen, we're not that will force them, but I'm sure there will be some.
I mean, we talked about that this morning a little bit. When I went to see Leila perform, my God, the thing that I was almost high after, it was just physicality. I mean, that is not sort of a trundle around in this kind of quite sedentary. But actually, when you see it on film, it's not. But yours is so cool. Some of the things you were doing is so cool. You could never. You should do some jumping. The seating in our room is very nice. So
Yeah, that is what I do.
I'll jump over.
But it's also interesting what you choose to do in given context.
But in a sense, it's your material is space.
And
Physical body space. And your material is something that has absolutely unbelievable properties. You started by talking about the tensile properties, for example, of metal. And what we know about that in terms of how far you can stretch it as gold. Extraordinary. And that's all about space. So it's just that the physical articulation is different. But the depth of its expertise, if you like, or of common purpose, or the experience of manipulation has a
I think that perhaps it's quite joyful to work with somebody that you do have a lot of similarities with, but and you kind of know that when you know how you work, but because we're put in fields, as it were, as Leila said, if I was put in the room with metalwork, I might have nothing to say to them. I don't know, because that's then about your interests.
You probably talk about materials.
I don't know. I don't know. I might be scared off and run away. I don't know. But yeah, I suppose.
So that's interesting because there's a kind of liberation.
Yeah.
One of the things that I was aware of, just meeting you both properly for the first time, was because you have your own careers. I suppose going back to the analogy of a love affair, but isn't it the case that people not that I'm suggesting you are, but people, when they get older, their marriages are more likely to succeed because you've got a full, your professions are at a certain level, so that you can come to it without that insecurity of thinking, oh my God, this is going to impinge on my sort of, you're mature people, practitioners. So it's a really nice thing to observe in that way. Because you're not threatened.
One observation and one question really. Well, the observation is someone will know this better than I, but I think there's a colour which is Farnham green. Because the pottery is all green. So serendipity. It is a much nicer green, but nevertheless I just share that. And that sort of leads me into I'm a theatre maker, and so often when you're working with an actor looking at a character, you will spend a lot of the time looking at what are the bits that are similar to the character you're playing, what are the bits that are not like your character. And I wonder to what extent the kind of politeness of the relationship means that we're looking for the things that are similar. And then you go, oh, look, and that sort of validates the experiment to some stage. And I know you've hinted at this, but I'm as equally interested in the things that are or not like, that are different in your practice. And I'm hoping that 3 weeks you get some chance to explore that a bit more.
There are some things in the background. I have a space. Leila doesn't have a permanent space.
I'm very nomadic.
But then, so I travel a lot. In fact, I end up feeling guilty that I'm away so much in that typical studio thing. But and I was saying to Leila about the space, setting up the conditions in there, so I know it's a calm space. I've made it a certain way so that I know I can go and work in there.
And I wonder if we don't talk about them so much because we're taking a bit for granted, and it might be interesting to not do that.
That's kind of what I'm saying.
I think maybe that's what's happening. Maybe we see what it is that we've seen what it is that you saw in your performance, and that's maybe told you what it is that I'm doing, and vice versa. Maybe.
There are some broader things. Like I've thought a lot about audience this week and being viewed. In the Jonathan Burrows book, it's been very good. Because, if there was a handbook for my sort of area, then you wouldn't really have a bit about audience. This is audience the whole way through, and yet I think we should have a bit about audience the whole way through.
Sure.
So for me, that's really extraordinary. And there's quite a lot like that I think,
there are dancers who don't think about them.
But I find that fascinating, that you suddenly think, and actually for me, some of the very physical things, I was saying I went home, I've been staying here mostly, I went home at night. I was walking down the hall, feeling the wall, and feeling the banister, and that was a new thing. I can't really explain. Of course I touched the banisters, but I was doing something different. So that was quite neat.
And for me, I think I said, as we were entering this, I don't spend much time thinking about how things are made. It's not a focus that I have really. Or, so I think, that also is quite interesting to me, and that's something that you are very interested in.
Well, then I brought a whole suitcase full of stuff. So I wonder about that. We haven't unpicked that so much. This stuffness.
I've just been reading, it's like a conversation between a filmmaker and a performance artist. And the author, the filmmaker, doesn't want to, she wants to sort of frustrate that sense of typical interview format of having, blah says this and so responds. So my experience of reading that was quite frustrating, really, because I suppose I wanted to get a sense of who was saying what. And I just wondered, part of her intention was because she wanted to have a sense of, well, really, we're all, and she was coming from a feminist position anyway, so she was thinking about how we might, it's all part of a discourse, and that so much of what we know and do anyway is overlapping. Anyway, I just thought about that in terms of your similarities and differences, and also how you might think about how you would document this exchange, without clear authorship, let's say.
We've touched on authorship,
We have talked about authorship.
because that's quite interesting, isn't it? In situations, sharing, doing things with somebody else.
You just talked quite a lot about how you do what you do, and you might do this in the first week, but have you had the conversations of why you you do what you do and why you make whatever you make, and because sometimes that's the more, for me, that's the more emotional thing, and that might spark the.
Have you discussed with each other?
Yeah.
Yes, we have done. I think, in a nutshell, I think as I said in the beginning, for me, it's a way of discussing my place here, and I think that's what in more depth in this world, in my environment, and yeah, I think that's what in more depth we've talked about.
We did actually before we started. We talked a bit about why we went right back to how we got to do what we do. So in a sense, the why came out in there too. Why did we choose to do everything we've done? Because we looked at that happening. And why do we continue to do them now, I suppose?
I often say, like, I love what I do. I realise that what I love about it is the connection, the opportunities for connecting with people that it gives me. And so sometimes I think, oh, actually, it could be something else. I'm not always choreography is just the thing. I can't imagine myself doing anything else. It's not the case for me. I can imagine being involved in something else, or that something else gave me this sort of, just opportunity to learn through meeting people and connecting with people, as this does.
We've got to just past past, so if we've got one more quick question, otherwise I think we'll bring this to an end. Is there anyone else who has a burning question?
There was just one thought about the way you use the word environment. I just wondered what that meant. You probably explained it, but you mentioned it a few times as being a word that seems to sum things up.
Yeah, it is.
It's quite loaded in this here and now, isn't it?
Yeah. I guess mainly probably I'm thinking of, when I'm using it in relation to my work, I'm probably thinking of the context, the conditions in which I'm making, and I'm thinking pretty quite close by around me. I think primarily that's how I think of it, but coming to this project in a way, and it's quite a sideways way of coming to investigate how you make and why you make. Incredible, but very unique occasion to meet with somebody that you don't know, that you haven't selected to work with, and it felt like then sort of investigating where we are doing this, and who else is around making, and what is Farnham and the university and what's around it felt really key. So
for me, as well, the sort of inside and outside nature of the place, and the materials it's made of, and the sort of, it's interesting about Farnham Green, how the material is, the place here relates to, responds to its environment. Material is what's made here that is of this place. And I guess in our travels around the college, what is of that place? Because a lot of people aren't there anymore, so what can we gather of that environment? We showed you've got the recycling bins outside, and I'm really interested in waste streams, where things start and end, and it's quite interesting. There's quite a lot of activity around those things. We even saw quite a bizarre thing we told somebody having a glass of wine
whilst
rummaging
rummaging.
Very good.
Only Farnham.
It's quite amusing. We've got some great shots of people in the bins, or you can just see their hands. And they've no idea we're watching, which is a bit. But so it is quite fascinating seeing how that stuff sort of travels around. And there's a whole sort of waste economy at the college. You see people charging rather than it's motorised
Forklift thing.
Trucks moving bins around. Yeah. So, and we've sort of ventured out and looked out around the environment. So it's been interesting. So I suppose that environment in quite full terms, and then I'm interested in that compared to when we were at the Elephant. And I live in Southwark, and obviously Siobhan Davis is in Southwark, and I'm going to walk to work. It's probably about half an hour to walk, but I've never worked in the borough that I live in, so that seems quite an exciting prospect in a way. But to also record that environment, because it's pretty harsh compared to this one. But I find that really interesting as well. Yeah. What that does to me even on the way. Yeah.
I was just thinking about the table of the table as you're doing whether or not you. I was just thinking, can you make your own environment? Or it feels like just sitting here looking at the space between the two of you. There seems to be which I know is called side by side. I'm not trying to kind of, but there seems to be that you two physically are creating an environment. I suppose is what I was sort of thinking that you were thinking about too, the empty space. When you're on your own, you don't make that kind of environment in that way, perhaps, or maybe you do.
But in a way, yeah, I guess in making work, I guess that's what you do slowly, isn't it? Or I
that kind of dialogue, yeah.
Yeah, it's been quite interesting. We'll probably explore it as well. We decided not to have any tables in that room, because I think with a table in it as well, it's really hard to get around. But we wanted to work at the same. Well, I like that we wanted to work at the same level as well, and that's been